Hi everyone. An update dispatch from Mekelle, from Mulugeta Gebrehiwot Berhe. I don't know if I should assume that every one of you knows who Mulugeta is, but just in case, Mulugeta is well, before the war, he was a professor at Tufts University in the United States. He was a professor of peace. He was also a researcher of peace and I think international relations and those subjects. And he was in Tigray when Abiy and Isaias in 2020 invaded Tigray. He was in Mekelle, so he joined the Tigray Defense Forces. And he was one of the very few people in Tigray who managed to write, even though Tigray was cut off. I think using satellite phone, so he managed to send out a couple of actually more than 10 by my count, articles from Tigray. I think one of them, as most of you remember, was about negotiation, about what a negotiation between the Tigray government and the Ethiopian regime should look like. It was a well-argued article, but of course, it's fair to say he was ignored. His recommendations were not heeded by the African Union. And he managed to give interviews as well when Tigray was under siege. So he was one of the reliable voices from Tigray. So a very renowned scholar and a prominent Tigrayan voice. And even after the signing of the Pretoria Agreement, he has been writing about the manner of implementation and about his dissatisfaction with the political culture in Tigray. Now, he's not very explicit about his opposition to the interim Tigray government, for instance, but he does make a point of he does find a way of making that point, that he's not happy with how things are going in Tigray. But in this specific update, which was, as I said, published yesterday, so actually this is part one. It has part two. So I don't know if I would be able to cover part two here. Maybe not. Maybe I will talk about parts two tomorrow. Or maybe some of you will have to read it. Anyway, in part one, he tells us that Mekelle is effectively under siege. He said that although life in Mekelle looks deceptively normal, he said that if you went around the city, businesses are running, nightlife is vibrant. People drink. Music's playing everywhere. Markets are busy, and all the sort of life in Mekelle in normal times is there to see. That is what he says. So for any observer who bases their understanding on what city life looks like, Mulugeta says that they would be tempted to conclude that everything is all right, that everything has returned to normal. But he says that would be a mistake. It would be a mistake to say that Mekelle has returned to normal. And interestingly, he's talking about Mekelle, and every one of us knows that Mekelle is much better off than other parts of Tigray. not least because there wasn't war in Mekelle, so Mekelle hasn't been damaged in the way cities like Shire and Adwa I was going to say Hausen, but Humora and other cities were, war zones. So Mekelle wasn't a war zone in that sense. So physically speaking, if we can use the word physical with the city, Mekelle is all right. So of course Mekelle is orders of magnitude better off than other places in Tigray. But he's talking about Mekelle, and he says that even in Mekelle, if you are a curious observer, if you really want to know what is happening, if you want to see the effects of the siege, he points 3 areas that you could see that. He talks about IDPs who are not visible to everybody. So people staying in schools. And he writes from his experience of visiting those IDP centers in Mekelle. And he said that a lot of IDPs from Western Tigray, especially from Southern Tigray, living crowded in IDPs in schools that have been turned into IDPs. And there's a picture that he, if you could see that, this is a picture that he took from one of the IDP centers in Mekelle. It was a picture taken in June 3, 2021, so it's been a while, but you could see the sort of life that people at IDP centers have. They're trying to make food, bake injera, and I wouldn't even say makeshift place. It's a known place. People shouldn't be living in these conditions, and you wouldn't believe that this is a kind of life that goes on in Mekelle. Again, judging by the stuff that you would be confronted with when you go to Mekelle from the airport. You go to Mekelle and everything would sound normal. City life is normal. Bars and restaurants and coffee houses are bustling with people. Everything is normal. So if you're not curious, that's one of the points that Mulugeta makes. You wouldn't see the effects of the siege that he argues is lingering. That's the word actually that he used. That there's a lingering siege, and you would have to be a keen observer to see that. So one area where you would be able to see the effect of siege, according to Mulugeta, is in IDP centers. The other area that he mentioned is military veterans, disabled people who don't have access to medical treatment. He said that there are a lot of disabled people in Mekelle waiting for the hardware needed for their treatment, for physiotherapy and other sorts of, I think it calls it, with the word, I think orthopedic treatment. So that is treatment to do with prosthetics and stuff like that. And there are thousands of people waiting for those sorts of treatment because no supply is getting to Mekelle. And actually, in the second part of the dispatch, which you might need to read, or maybe I will talk about it tomorrow, he talks about hospital conditions, and he actually recounts a story from a visit that he made to the hospital, and from conversations that he had with nurses. Nurses were literally crying when they told him the extremely desperate situation at the hospital, not least because they don't have medical equipment, medical supply. But anyway, in terms of the disabled military veterans, he said that you could see the effect of the siege. Can you imagine how painful it is to witness people who have lost legs and who could be treated treated in the sense that who could receive some sort of orthopedic treatment, prosthetic replacement and stuff like that. But they couldn't receive that sort of treatment because there is no supply. Not because it's medically impossible, not because it's a complex procedure, but because there simply is no supply. And the reason there is no medical supply is not because there are not volunteers who are ready to supply those medical hardware, but because the Ethiopian regime wouldn't allow. So the siege is continuing in various, sometimes subtle, sometimes less subtle ways. And Mulugeta doesn't say it explicitly, but he's very damning of the interim government. He implies somewhere that the interim government should have been complaining. The interim government should have been pushing for supplies to get into Tigray. Again, I just want to emphasize that this is in Mekelle, where conditions are much, much better compared to other places in Tigray. So if Mulugeta based his observation on, say, Adwa, for instance, it would be much, much more dire than the picture painted here. And the picture painted is already dire. So it's really extremely dire, especially when you read about the condition of the military veterans who are suffering from injuries that could have been treated, that could have been dealt with some measure of success. Or the other, actually something that made me almost cry is the condition of women who have been raped by Eritrean and by Ethiopian forces and by Amhara militia, of course. And he gives us a very interesting statistics here. So so I'm going to read aloud from this one. An unaccounted number of Tigrayan women and girls are survivors of sexual violence. So an accounted number is very important to keep this in mind. The Damage Assessment Commission of the Tigray administration made a survey that covered 1.7 million people. So that is about 1/4 of the total population. And official reporters indicate the number of people reporting that they are survivors of sexual violence to be more than 45,000. So 45,000 women from 1.7 million people have reported that they had experienced some sort of sexual violence, whether that is outright rape or other forms of violence. Given that this is a very important point, given that the Tigray society is very conservative, one can imagine a significant number of victims who opted to not report their suffering during their survey. If one adds that 3/4 of the population that was not included in the survey, either due to lack of capacity or because their areas of residence are still under occupation, the number would be many times higher, of course. And the point is that they're not getting any sort of support. They're not getting any sort of psychological support. They're not they haven't received any sort of medical support. They are not receiving any sort of economic support because Tigray, as Mulugeta points out, is a very conservative society, and women who have been raped. And this is one of the sad ironies of Tigray. If you are a woman who has been raped, you are likely to be ostracized by the society. Although, again, I haven't read any stories about that, but if that was happening, it wouldn't surprise me, because that is the kind of society that sort of heaves into conservatism. Is societies tend to ostracize people who have gone through an unorthodox experience, although that experience was the fault of the person. And actually, we could see signs of that in one story that Mulugeta tells us here. So I'm going to read out the story because I think it captures the essence of the suffering related to sexual violence. So Mulugeta tells us the story of Zaid. So she's a young woman. He doesn't tell her age, but I think I would say in her early 20s. So this is what Mulugeta writes. I had a chance to talk with Zaid, a survivor of sexual violence who was impregnated as a result of rape. Zaid was raped by EDF, so that is Eritrean Defense Forces, soldiers in February 2022. She was young and she only knew of her pregnancy after 3 months. At the time she reached a hospital, the fetus was already 5 months and too late to be interrupted. Zaid delivered the child in a safe house in Mekelle. She now has a 2-year-old and a 2 years and 5 months old beautiful baby boy. But her journey of motherhood is traumatizing. She says it was hard for her to accept the fact that she had to let the fetus grow in her and give birth. It was a constant reminder of suffering and humiliation she went through. Furthermore, she says, I had a dream to study and be wedded to my beloved one and get children and make my family proud by becoming a good wife to my husband. So that is the typical dream that Tigrayan girls would have. Now that dream is lost. She continues, there is no chance for me to go back to school and it will be so difficult to have a husband, let alone make my family proud. And the reason that she knows it would be increasingly difficult for her to have a husband is because she has been raped. And if you have been raped, that means that you are less desirable. That is one of the things that is really painful, and people in the Tigrayan community should actually have a conversation. This is a subject about which there should be proper education. It's not her fault that Zaid has been raped, and the fact that she has been raped by Eritrean soldiers doesn't make her less of a human being, less desirable of a potential wife. But that sort of conversation doesn't happen in Tigray, and I think people should talk about this because this is one story about Zaid, but there will be thousands of similar stories. Anyway, the story continues. Zaid is happy that she doesn't have any physical problems right now, but she's facing a relentless economic struggle to raise her child and support herself as a servant in a private house. When at work, during daytime, she leaves her child with her passionately caring grandmother. Her grandmother, with all her kindness at times, unintentionally says some words that remind her of the crime committed on her. She says, my grandmother affectionately cares for her grandson, but sometimes, usually when giving it birth, unconsciously hints at a painful issue. She may say, this baby doesn't have any resemblance to our family. Does it truly belong to us? Zaid says she gets hurt when she hears those words, and she cannot ask her beloved grandmother not to say them, as the love she has becomes a barrier. She also hates people asking her, is this your baby? Who is his father and where is she? So, despite the prospect for peace, Zaid's poignant words echo the sentiment of countless survivors of sexual violence. They are robbed of their dreams. They are physically, economically, and psychologically challenged, and they are yearning for justice. Which is in the middle of these stresses and hardship that they struggle to navigate their path for survival. The lucky ones are finding a way back to normalcy. All of them are still living the war, and there is no attempt inside to cure their problems. So this is one area where Mulugeta says you could see the effect of the lingering siege. If you went out of your way to find out stories that resemble Zaid's story, you know that the siege is active, is ongoing. And Or the other things I think every one of you will know is humanitarian assistance has been suspended because regime officials and apparently some officials from the Tigray government and also Eritrean government were engaged in massive aid diversion, and that sort of offended US aid and WFP, and as a result, aid has been suspended. Actually parallel investigations have been launched. One of them was by the Tigray government, which I think has concluded with findings. Significant portion of the aid was diverted by Eritreans and by Ethiopians, and a fraction of it by the Tigray authorities. But despite the Tigray government having published the findings of the investigation, nothing has happened in terms of resumption of assistance. And Mulugeta says that people are suffering in Tigray. But again, the point that I really want to emphasize, because that's the point that Mulugeta also is trying to emphasize, is that if you are basing your observation on what the city looks like, on what life in Mekelle looks like, you are unlikely to see these things. You have to go out of your way. You have to consciously seek for these stories to understand that they exist. So he said that the siege is there, just that its form has changed. And as I said earlier, he has another story, part 2. I think this is enough for today. Maybe tomorrow I'm going to speak about the thing that he discusses in part 2. But those of you who have access and time, try to read part 2 as well. He goes into some detail about the conditions at Eider Hospital. And Eider Hospital is by far the best hospital in Tigray. But even at the best hospital in Tigray, he paints a really, really grim picture of a hospital that might soon actually close most of its operation because it simply doesn't have budget, it doesn't have supply, and people aren't paying attention to what is happening. So that was that for today. Thank you for staying with me, and bye-bye.